Herbert's 100 harem. The girls were ecstatic at the idea. A hunting trip with a grand mistress. Their husband full-on participating. It sounded like something out of a young Yaoya or Zedine's dream. It had taken a bit of poking about, but there are roughly 4 separate hunting worlds within just a few days' travel from Centris. It had been interesting to learn that all hunting worlds were actually failed colonies that failed specifically due to the extremely deadly predators in the area. The requirement was one or more predators so dangerous that building a stable, safe colony would require the complete decimation of the animal species or even just a complete reset on the biosphere in more extreme cases. But of course, like with any sensible-sounding rule, there are almost as many exceptions to the rule as things that follow the rule themselves. Maribor is a world that has not only a single supercontinent, but almost the entirety of it is covered in a brutal jungle. Its size-shifting scythe bears sounded like something out of a trippy nightmare and an Australian urban legend. More specifically, the drop bear. Its proper name was a Mar-Yatha in the language of the earlier colonists. Apparently, these things had outright started digging into spaceships to try and get at the gobes inside before the world was declared too dangerous to settle. The actual hunting lodges were in orbit and in very tightly controlled caves that were mostly just portal doors to the surface. That prize was a simple enough one. It was just insanely dangerous from all sides and was a very skilled ambush predator. Aggressive, easy to bait and lure, and apparently moderately good eating. Herbert was going to make sure he caught at least 1 or 2 extra for study back on the Dauntless, though, as apparently the bastards could naturally channel axiom through their claws and blades. An adaptation, as their most stable food supply was some kind of teleporting land clam thing that was about the size of a bus. Also, very good eating as well, but it can manifest spikes if it's not killed instantly. Also, rumors about pearls, roughly the size of a man's head with the bases being large stones or even bones of things the clam has eaten. They were called Marstores, so that thing was prize number 2. But it was more just something to collect on the way back. The Mar-Yatha were the real prize, top predator of the planet, and when they had enough, they were going to go on to the next world, Skathak. Unlike Maribor, Skathak actually has a colony on the surface. It's a more traditional hunting world, in that there is a colony whose residents can be neatly dived into hunters, those that support the hunters and their families. 3 simple groups. There are more differences on Skathak than the colony, of course. It's a fairly rocky world with very high winds and deep crags that go down to a tectonic level. That's where the target nests, the Skathak lava serpents. Take a snake, give it a body a few hundred meters long, and have it subsist on both the heat of volcanic crags and whatever minerals or meat it can get its mouth around. It's not poisonous, but it is a living battering ram that has been known to snap slow-moving vehicles that get too close and swallow them whole. A constrictor that would make a solid go at a blue whale. That's also so naturally burning hot that its scales are actually made of semi-molten iron. Yeah, it's going to be a bitch to kill. Finding it shouldn't be an issue. But killing it? He'll need to get clever. And cold. He'll need to bring something cold to hit and hope the sheer thermal shock does the job. If not, maybe a missile to the eye. Once Esma's done having him fight about 1,000 levels outside his weight class, she's going to turn the tables and bring him to Paredo. This world is the 3rd type of hunting world where it's not that the entire world is deadly, just certain environments. As such, there was actually a full-on luxury resort for hunters, and if you brought in a few of the big kills for the big wigs to enjoy, then you gotta stay for free. As for the target, they're in the water. The oceans have beasts in it that would be right at home on the Apuk homeworld. Or rather, that would fit in somewhat as Serbo doesn't have giant crabs. It has giant serpent and whale monsters, also squids, but not really giant crabs, or rather giant sea centipedes that took boxing lessons from the mantis shrimp and surpassed the master in every way. They were also only about the size of a large dog, smaller than Herbert himself, but when a creature's hunting style is to shatter bedrock and sift through the debris, it's not a boxing match you want to casually get into. He was going to try to get one alive and in stasis for study, first as challenge to himself and another as a bit of a fuck you to the lab boys who told him that this should be easy. Finally comes the last world, a hot desert and jungle-covered world where one beast rules over all others. Jalik is the name of the world. The Jalik is also the name of a gigantic bird. They're blue on the underside to blend with the sky, and every color of the rainbow on the top, with a few in the ultraviolet spectrum that look stark white to human eyes. It's not as big as the lava serpents, but it is fast. A peregrine falcon with teleportation and time dilation axiom powers, meaning it causally breaks the sound barrier. It's also smart. Not people smart, but vengeful smart, hateful smart, picking up a gang of friends to rip you apart smart. His plan was to hit that one from orbit and never be in a place they can swoop onto. Stay above the swooping bird and it should see him safe. Hopefully. Maybe. For the good news, more than a few of his girls are training to be hunt mistresses. Yzma herself is going to be helping him, and there are some new toys to play with. What he's particularly interested in is the blue heron, as it's called. The herons are a prototype series of water-capable plasma and laser weapons that make use of force field principles to not only extend the range out to degrees that are mind-boggling in atmosphere, let alone underwater, but also hit faster, giving little time to dodge. In principle, the weapon has two triggers: a compression pad in the grip that causes a beam to shoot out and does no harm, but it does cause the area to effectively empty of all water and air, making a temporary cavitation. This alone can cause some pain, but what it does, it set up a track for the plasma bolt to launch down. Since it's effectively in space at that point, it loses none of its power for as long as it can follow the beam and then slam into the target. The range of the beam is 100 meters currently, but the device has some obvious downsides. First off, you can't surprise anyone with it. The void path it makes with the beam is stupidly obvious. Even if you don't fire down it and just turn it off, it's still a gap of atmosphere that closes with a crack. Not as loud as a gun going off, but very fucking hard to mistake as anything but a problem. There's also the issue of plasma itself. It tends to unravel even in void, splashing out a bit. So the weapon needs to have the plasma primed tighter than usual. They couldn't spin it or rifle the barrel. It just caused it to unravel faster. Furthermore, the compression was a bit of an issue with also mounting the force barriers, and the complicated axiom bullshit needed to quickly turn an isolated area into a vacuum. Still, the upsides were just too good. Hypercondensed plasma can punch through anything that's not specifically shielded for it. If the first thing it actually hits is a target, then significant parts of that target are thoroughly past tense. You'd need to disintegrate someone to deal more damage. Him mentioning that when he got the blue heron had him helpfully reminded by the lab boy that one of the pirate humpers could, and did disintegrate things, and did it as more than just a way to strategically delete parts of the battlefield and opposing force. He also fed the local axiom field and used it to power fireballs strong enough to leave mushroom clouds or teleport entire satellites into the orbit of neighboring worlds. No, Herbert is not afraid of Franklin. That would be absurd. It would be completely idiotic for one member of the Undaunted to fear another, even if the after-mission reports read like bullet point summations to horror stories with an unstoppable monster as the bad guy. Beyond that, there was some new tracking and sensor toys he was being given to help with the hunt. Aside from that, he had an entire compacted arsenal. It had some breakthroughs as of late, and instead of being the size of a locker and expanding to outfit an army, It was the size of a backpack and held enough for an army and the rations to feed them. The end goal was to get them to the size of a wallet and big enough on the inside to arm the hostile takeover of an entire planet. Herbert had requested to see if they could be made smaller in both regards, to simply have an arsenal for a single agent on the field. That was going to be the next project, but from the sounds of it, they were aiming to make it something the size of a coin and enough to have the gear he needs to sabotage, kill, or spy on anything and everything. There were times Herbert wondered if someone on the team was scared of him. Probably not. He's a low-profile agent. Franklin, Vernon, the Chainbreakers, and the like are all about being loud and impressive. Gives him all the cover he needs to pull of potential miracles and walk out without being seen. So they had a fairly comfortable ship sent out for them. It was civilian craft and known as a Heracrow G900 medium freighter. It had enough storage space and passenger space to easily carry not only them, but the upcoming prizes. It had been recommended by the Exotic Vehicle Inquiry League. Peaceful contact and openness to diplomacy were cutting a lot of potential problems off at the knees. If the trip worked out well with the G900, then they would be hired on as civilian contractors to help out with the development of further undaunted ships. Of course, there would be a few NDAs, but it was a dream deal for the girls and a damn good one for the undaunted. The ship itself works as an inverted wedge. Big blocky front with all sorts of chunky sensors, chambers for cargo and such, and the angles behind them all have engines on to give these things a lot of maneuvering power and a stupid amount of thrust. As a civilian craft, it was mostly mounted with shields and such things, but there were still numerous embankments for weapons. Not enough to throw off a dedicated pirate attack, but more than enough to stall one out long enough to kick the engines into overdrive and outrun just about anything. G900s use the galaxy over as fast couriers and smuggling ships. They're almost impossible to chase down and instead have to be tracked, making them outright perfect for those with illicit intentions. Those who can play around with their transponders or make use of multiple transponders can and do make a killing in illegal work. There were a few in the EFL, but they tended to be heavily crewed. But according to Evil, they could be run on a skeleton crew and with minimal training, that there were a lot of systems that could be easily slaved to a basic algorithm and automated entirely. These changes can apparently cut the crew requirements down to a quarter, if not a fifth. The crew in question was also a small group of hired girls with a few more undaunted men to both learn from them and serve as security and extra muscle if things go pear-shaped. He hadn't encountered the race before, but they apparently favor the lower parts of Centris, and he's only been down there on infiltration, so he's only seen them from afar and only as civilians as well, so he kept himself and the trouble he brought with him well away from them. In summation, rat women, furry, long, sinewy tail, massive survivors. They were human scale and had a smaller cousin that they shared their birth world with that were basically mice. The rats tended to take a more aggressive and leadership role where the mice went for technical skill. They had requested and gained a single entry for their two races. They were that close. IKEA. Both races liked their caves, tunnels, and staying out from under open sky. So lower Centris spires, ships and colonies bored into the sides of mountains. A wholesome, harmless people with a squeaky clean record. So of course, Herbert was starting to go into paranoid circles about it. Madame Stepanova could be a bad influence.